Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be diving into some Elder Scrolls lore. We're going to be examining Solstheim, a frozen island north of Tamriel, off the coast of Skyrim and Morrowind. In particular, we are going to be comparing how Solstheim appears in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim versus how it appears in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, a game that came out a decade earlier than Skyrim. If you've only played Skyrim, you might be interested to see the origins of the island that made up the Dragonborn DLC of Skyrim. So, first off, let's touch on a bit of Solstheim's history. In ancient times, the Nords, led by Ysgramor, fought the snow elves of Skyrim to claim the land for themselves. The final battle of this war came on Solstheim, where the Snow Prince, the Snow Elf leader, was killed. He was killed by a 12-year-old Nord girl who witnessed the Snow Prince slay her mother, and in retribution she picked up her mother's sword and cast it through the Snow Prince. With this defeat, Snow Elf society completely collapsed, and they retreated underground under the sanctuary of the dwarves, who betrayed the Snow Elves and fed them poisonous fungus that turned them into the degenerated blind Falmer that we know in Skyrim today. When dragons ruled, the dragon priest Miraak turned on his masters in favor of the Daedric prince Hermaeus Mora. Miraak was defeated, and he retreated to Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's plane of oblivion, and the dragon cult that Miraak had fought against ruled Solstheim until the Nords rose up and defeated Alduin the World Eater and his dragon servants. Eventually, the battle at Red Mountain, which was a colossal battle between Dwemer, Khymer, Nord, Orc, and Khajiit. Although there's so many sources about the battle at Red Mountain and they don't always agree, so it's hard to say exactly who was there and what happened. But fundamentally, the battle was over the powers of godhood. It was over the powers of who could, essentially become a god. But that's a big story for another time. The point for our purposes is that at the Battle of Red Mountain, the Dwemer, the dwarves, suddenly disappeared all across Tamriel, including on Solstheim. They just vanished. After this, for thousands of years, the dominant culture on Solstheim was the Skaal, a subculture of the Nord people. Their beliefs center on harmony with nature and the world around them. They believe in animism, thinking that animals and plants and earth and water are all kind of sacred spirits. They're all aspects of the All-Maker's creation, who is their God. And they believe that the adversary is the All-Maker's opponent, enemies trying to harm the Skaal if they should abandon their sacred ways. The Skaal treasure 6 standing stones around Solstheim, each one representing a treasured gift given by the Allmaker to the Skaal. The beast stone represents the beasts whose meat and pelts provide food and clothing for the Skaal. The tree stone represents plants and trees that provide nourishment and shade and materials to build their homes. The sunstone represents the sun, which provides warmth and light for the frigid Solstheim. The water stone represents the oceans of fish and orcas that serve for meat, and of course the water itself to quench thirst. The earth stone represents the rich soil that can sprout with life, and the windstone represents the cooling breezes and the spirit of the Allmaker. In Morrowind, you must travel across Solstheim and reclaim each of these gifts, retracing the steps of Avar Stonesinger, an ancient hero of the Skaal who reclaimed the gifts of the Allmaker when they were stolen by the Greedy Man long ago. And the Greedy Man is an aspect of the adversary of the Skaal. Once you complete the quest at each stone, the oneness and harmony of Solstheim is restored. The oneness had been sort of taken away because of the encroachment of the Imperials on the island, but we'll get to that in a bit. In Skyrim, to compare, these standing stones have all been corrupted by Miraak, and he has ensorcelled the residents of the island to labor at the stones in a sort of sleep-walking state, where they construct temples for the dragon priest and corrupt these stones. Once you purify a stone of Miraak's influence, you can gain gifts of the Allmaker at each stone in the form of special powers. For instance, you can summon a werebear with the beast stone, and you can heal those around you with the water stone. Now, during the Third Era, a group of Skaal abandoned their village to return to what they saw as the true ancient ways of a Nord. They eschewed the Skaal's traditions, instead choosing to hunt and fight without restraint, guzzling mead and comparing trophies from their hunts in Thirsk, the great mead hall that they built in which to live and feast and drink. The greatest warrior among them would rule the hall, needing only to brandish a trophy taken from the corpse of a worthy foe and obtain approval from Hrothmund the Red's spirit, the founder of Thirsk. By traveling to Hrothmund's barrow and placing their hands on his axe, a prospective leader of Thirsk can gain his approval or his disapproval. In Morrowind, Hrothmund's barrow is small and cramped, while in Skyrim it is a spacious room, kind of a vault-like room, and it's flooded with water, which drains when you enter it. The Mead Hall of Thirsk has 2 floors in Morrowind, with bedrooms on the 2nd floor, while the Thirsk of Skyrim has the beds in a back room and no 2nd floor. So that's kind of the state of things on Solstheim, with its human residents, the Skaal, and the Nords of Thirsk. And then later on, in the Third Era, the Empire came to Solstheim, establishing the garrison of Fort Frostmoth on the island's southern coast to oversee imperial interests on the island. The fort was an unenviable post for the imperial soldiers. They hated the cold temperatures of the island and the harsh conditions there, and a posting at Fort Frostmoth came to be used and seen as a punishment, a disciplinary measure for problematic soldiers who refused to take orders or, had other disciplinary issues. The fort captain was a man named Falx. He was a firm leader, but generally seen as fair by his subordinates. Even so, problems were endemic at the fort. Morale was constantly low, and numerous people in the fort were secretly working against it. Morale took a severe dive when the fort's priest of the imperial cult, a man named Antonius Nuncius, began diverting the alcohol shipments that were arriving at the fort into his own chambers, and spreading the word among the guards that Captain Carius had banned alcohol. The priest was hoping to inspire a mutiny at the fort when the guards were outraged about not having their alcohol. And Nuncius hoped that this mutiny could get him reassigned off of the island, because he hated being there so much. What's more, a group of soldiers were actually stealing weapon shipments and smuggling them for their own profit, diverting weapons that were meant for the fort to protect itself and selling them. The greatest disaster for Fort Frostmoth came when a group of werewolves assaulted it, kidnapping Captain Carius and inflicting just incredible structural damage on the fort, knocking down huge gaps in its walls. And, on a side note, I've always been shocked at the damage to the walls at this part, because, it's a bunch of werewolves and they've knocked down the walls like they're using trebuchets or something. But despite all of this hardship, the fort survived, and Captain Carius eventually escaped from his imprisonment by the werewolves to oversee the fort again. The fort was again threatened years later when Nords from Skyrim conquered the island and attempted to destroy the fort. The specifics of this event are unclear, but it seems that the fort survived. Well, not seems, it did survive. But it seems that, little changed on the island besides the official integration of Solstheim into the province of Skyrim, rather than the island being a holding of Morrowind. It was a somewhat perfunctory declaration, however, as the island had long been de facto dominated by the Nords anyways. Over 200 years later, however, by the events of Skyrim, Fort Frostmoth is nothing but ruins. This was the result of the eruption of Red Mountain, the massive volcano in Morrowind, which detonated after a moon struck Vivec City near the mountain. This is a pretty cool story in its own right, but basically Vivec, one of the gods of the Dunmer Tribunal, was holding up a little moon right above the city that was going to impact it, and Vivec stopped it there, only a few meters above the city to protect it, but he left it there so that if the people of the city ever stopped loving Vivec, he could punish them by letting the moon strike the city and completely destroying it. So, once Vivek later died, the moon did indeed come down and destroy Vivek City, and this impact triggered the eruption of the volcano. This disaster caused widespread death and destruction across Morrowind, and triggered a war called the Accession War, in which the Argonians of Blackmarsh invaded Morrowind and devastated the weakened province even further. For our purposes today, however, we only care about the Red Year's effects on Solstheim, which was quite significant. I'll speak more on the other changes to Solstheim as a result of this eruption a little later, which were very significant. But let's close the loop on Fort Frostmoth. The fort was destroyed by the volcanic eruption, and the Imperial garrison there was decimated, including the death of Captain Carius. The fort would molder for centuries until the Dark Elf wizard Ildari Sarathril went to the fort to conduct experiments with ash stones, raising an army of ash spawn monstrosities and reanimating the old Captain Carius, who seemingly lost his mind in his reanimation. The captain was paranoid and terrified of the Dark Elves who had settled on the island after his death, and he wrote letters to the Imperial Council requesting guidance on how to deal with the elves, whom he perceived as invaders. In the absence of orders from the Council, Carius dispatched waves of ash spawn to attack the Dark Elves, until he and his servants were eventually put down by the Dragonborn. And that is the end of the story of Fort Frostmoth. But now, let's rewind back 200 years and examine the other major settlement on the island that we've yet to cover, Raven Rock. In Skyrim, you may know Raven Rock as the biggest community on the island, overseen by House Redoran. However, back in 2002 in Morrowind, Raven Rock was nothing but a stretch of empty coastal soil. One of the major quest lines on the island was overseeing the growth of the infant mining town, and you could either safeguard its development towards stability or exploit and endanger the town for your own profit. The town was founded by the East Empire Company in the year 427 of the Third Era, after the company discovered the island's ebony stores, a very valuable mineral. The Nerevarine, who is the protagonist of Morrowind, helped the settlement grow from a barren stretch of coastline to a profitable ebony town. The town would continue in this state until the end of the Oblivion Crisis, during which the Daedric hordes of Mehrunes Dagon laid waste to Tamriel. In the aftermath of this event, a group of House Redoran Dunmer from Morrowind, led by Brara Morvain, sought a new home in which to settle, and they decided on Raven Rock. They negotiated with the town's owners, the East Empire Company, and were welcomed into the settlement as new residents. When the Red Year arrived and the Red Mountain erupted, Raven Rock was changed again. In addition to being heavily damaged by the volcano's blast, the town also lost the Imperial garrison at Fort Frostmoth, rendering the town all but defenseless, with only a few survivors, a few of the Imperial soldier survivors taking refuge in the town. Brara Morvain solved this issue by calling on her Redoran connections, and the town has been defended by elite Redoran soldiers ever since. When the endless ash from Red Mountain that was constantly spewed out of the volcano threatened to bury the town, Morvain and the East India Company constructed the Bulwark, a huge wall covering the east end of town that successfully warded off the worst of the ash. In the 16th year of the Fourth Era, Skyrim gave Solstheim to Morrowind, and the East Empire Company was forced to relinquish ownership of Raven Rock. The town was turned over to House Redoran completely. Dunmer refugees from Morrowind flocked to Solstheim after the island was given up by Skyrim's High King, and Raven Rock experienced a period of prosperity under its Redoran owners. Things would take a turn under the leadership of Councillor Leril Morvain, however. Though he was a good steward of the town, a series of setbacks would bring Raven Rock to its knees. These included assassination attempts on Morvain's life, the disrepair of the Bulwark, and attacks by Argonian raiders. The town's true death sentence came when the ebony mine dried up, supposedly, leaving the residents to subsist on hunting and fishing, trades which were nowhere near as profitable as mining. This disaster was illusory, however, for the mine had not truly dried up. A resident of the town, the old miner Crescius Corellius, believed the mine was still rich in ebony, but he was ignored by the rest of the town. After the Dragonborn investigated the mine on Corellius's behalf and discovered Bloodskull Barrow, the mine was reopened and the ebony flowed freely again, resuscitating Raven Rock and bringing commerce and wealth back to the town. And that's the story of Raven Rock. Speaking of Bloodskull Barrow, this was also a location present in Morrowind, though in a very different form. In Skyrim, the barrow is expansive and intricate, like many of the Nord burial grounds, the old Nord ruins full of Draugr. And it includes an outdoor ruin section that's been overtaken by bandits, and there's even a dragon priest inside named Zakrisos. In Morrowind, however, it is very different. The barrow is dark, cramped, and tiny. Just like in Skyrim, however, the Bloodskull blade does appear there, sitting on a pedestal. When you pick up the sword, a group of skeletons in Draugr suddenly appear and attack you. There's a nice little reference to this in Skyrim, or sort of a continuity, because when you find the Bloodskull blade on the corpse of Gratian Corellius, you also find his journal, and it describes how when he picked up the blade, it caused the nearby Draugr to leap up and attack him, just like what happened in Morrowind. And, the Draugr, of course, they're major enemies in Skyrim. You've no doubt cut down hundreds of them if you've played the game. And it's quite interesting to see how they've changed over the years. In Morrowind, there are these hunched zombie creatures that are hungry for human flesh, and they fight with kicks and punches. This, of course, is very different from the armored and armed undead creatures in Skyrim. In Morrowind, the Skaal tell you that Draugr are the remains of Nords who ate human flesh on Solstheim to avoid starving to death, and that having committed such a crime against nature, the Allmaker cursed them to be eternally hungry undead monsters. This seems unlikely to be the complete truth, as the sheer volume of Draugr in Skyrim would require that a, frankly, credulity-straining number of Nords had engaged in cannibalism. Or even if you ignore Skyrim, just the Draugr on Solstheim, really. You also have to make allowances for gameplay, right? But, anyway, in Skyrim, however, the Skyrim game, A major theory suggests that the Draugr were cursed with undeath in their service to the ancient dragons, or that the Draugr aren't even technically dead, but that they have just the faintest bit of life energy still in them, and that their decrepit appearance comes only from their old age, not from a sort of rotting, mummified, undead condition. This theory, I believe, suggests that the dragon priests are kind of feeding off the faint life energy of all the Draugr to, prolong their own life as well. But let's talk about Solstheim itself, the island, and how its environment has massively changed between the two games. In Morrowind, the island is divided roughly into 3 biomes. The southern half of the island is called the Thirsk Forest, with scattered pine trees littering a hilly, rocky terrain, and caverns and ancient Nord barrows are dug into these hillocks. There are snowy patches here and there, and snowstorms occasionally sweep through the trees and grass, but the snow doesn't linger for long. It's largely a green zone, full of grizzly bears, wolves, and spriggans. North of the Thirsk Forest, the land becomes permanently shrouded in snow. These are called the Insinfir Plains, a tundra region in which the Skaal people live, and this is also where you can find the Mead Hall of Thirsk and the Nord warriors inside. And the creatures here include snow wolves and snow bears, and horkers hang out on Lake Fjalding. Ice caves are common here, holding many dangers, including the mysterious Grawl, which are these big, strange troll creatures with tusks. The northwest part of the island is kind of walled off by the Moosering Mountains, a jagged series of peaks that kind of curve around this one section of the island. This shielded, walled-off portion is the coldest spot on Solstheim. It's just covered in ice everywhere you look. The 2 most significant features here are Castle Karstaag, the home of the frost giant Karstaag, and the Great Mortrag Glacier, a huge sheet of ice towering over the ocean waters, which hides the deadly maze of the Daedric Prince here seen. By the events of Skyrim, this landscape has changed dramatically. The Thirsk Forest is all but destroyed, having been buried in ash from Red Mountain, and the trees that are still visible are burnt to a crisp. In the forest's place, a new ecosystem has grown, with ash hopper bugs burrowing through the ground, and the levitating netches from Morrowind drifting over the ash in search of food. Notably, a fungi settlement has grown up on the coast as well, intentionally grown there by the wizard Neloth of House Telvanni, the wizard house of Morrowind. Between the giant mushroom homes, the floating niches, and the fact that you can even find a lone silt strider, the south of modern Solstheim feels much more like the island of Vardenfell in Morrowind than the much more Skyrim-like region that it once was. The Dwemer city of Karstaag is also a new addition, having risen from the sea, miraculously, utilizing the ancient Dwemer technology. Nobody knows quite why it came back up out of the sea, but that was not present in Morrowind. North of the ash, however, the environment has remained relatively unchanged compared to old Solstheim. The few remaining green trees of the Thirsk Forest give way to a frigid tundra and the Skaal village and Thirsk meat hall still eke out their existence there. The largest changes can be found in the Moosring mountain region, where the once great Mortrag glacier is now a crumbled expanse of ice, having collapsed at the end of the Morrowind Bloodmoon DLC. The other major change is the fall of Castle Karstaag. Though the bones of the castle still remain, it has fallen into disrepair and hardly resembles its impressive condition during its glory days. Under the reign of the castle's master, Karstaag, the place had an impressive throne room, a grand dining hall, and other facilities. It seems that after the death of Karstaag, no other suitable leader took control, other than the primitive Rieklings. As a fun fact, you actually kill Karstaag in the Morrowind DLC, as he is another participant caught up in Hircine's hunt, just like your character. And in Skyrim, you can find his skull buried in the remnants of the old glacier, and if you return it to his throne, his spirit attacks you. And as you can see, his spirit's knockdown ability is quite powerful, it's no joke. Speaking of the Rieklings who took over Castle Karstaag, we should talk about those little blue goblin things. They are endemic to Solstheim and can be found all over the island. They're generally considered savages by other peoples, but they do have intelligence and culture of their own, and they can communicate with other peoples if they, share a common language. They've certainly not achieved technological advances on par with the societies around them, but they're known to tame bristleback boars and ride them into combat, which makes them particularly dangerous. They hunt, they raid, and they steal as they can, and have generally confrontational relationships with the peoples around them. And, if they do share a language with others, negotiations and cooperation and trading have been known to occur. In Morrowind, we see a conflict between the Rieklings at Castle Karstaag. With the disappearance of their frost giant leader, the Rieklings split into two factions, with one faction led by Dulk, a Riekling still loyal to his missing master, and the other led by Krish, who sought to make himself the new leader of the castle. Unfortunately for Krish, he hired a group of Graal, mysterious troll-like creatures, to aid him in taking over the castle. But they betrayed him and ate all of his loyal Rieklings. Depending on your choices in the story, whether you become a werewolf and serve Hircine, or cure yourself of lycanthropia and continue working with the Skaal, you either help Dulk maintain order at the castle, or you aid Krish in his revolution. And in Skyrim, we see another power play by an ambitious Riekling, as a chief and his tribe have taken over Thirsk meat hall, expelling the Nords within. This is a fairly humiliating defeat for the Nords that kind of represents their descent into laziness, gluttony, weakness, as any previous generation of the Thirsk Nords should easily have been able to repel the Riekling attack, as they're armed with only small spears. You'll be asked by the Riekling chief to help you finish off the Nords who ran away. And if you do that, then the meat hall becomes a fortress of the Rieklings, and they live there as their new home. Or you can side with the Nords and help to retake their meat hall and get them back in their house. Of course, course, if you kill the Nords, you get to become the new Riekling chief, and the tribe is loyal to you, and you can use them as a follower, and they'll sometimes show up and help you in battles. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, this covers, I'd say the major changes between Solstheim in Morrowind and Solstheim in Skyrim. There are some more miscellaneous changes that I noticed. For instance, in Morrowind, werewolves are roaming free on the island. They've been summoned by Hirsine in preparation for his Bloodmoon hunt. And for the record, in case you're unfamiliar with the story of the Bloodmoon DLC in Morrowind is you go to Solstheim, and Hirsine is abducting strong people to serve in this hunt he does every once in a while. And you have to fight your way through his maze of werewolves and escape the glacier. But yeah, where was I? I was talking about the werewolves. So in Morrowind, the werewolves are all over the place. But by the time of Skyrim, the werewolves have been significantly pushed back. They're weakened, they're on the back foot, and in their place are the werebears, who seem to have kind of come out on top in that conflict. And speaking of the werebears, I don't know for sure if there's a connection here, but in Morrowind, you come across these nearly naked Nords called Berserkers, who wear bearskin items and are led by a den mother. And of course, bears live in dens. And in Morrowind, you are told that Berserkers have been driven mad by the cold and by drinking too much mead. That's what the Skaal tell you anyways. So the bear connections and the nudity is reminiscent of the werebears in Skyrim, who also go shirtless. So I don't know for sure if these are related, but I do see kind of an implication that the Berserkers became werebears at some point before the events of Skyrim. Yeah, that's just a connection I see. I don't know if that's lore accurate or anything. But what else? Right, in Skyrim, you might have come across an upturned vehicle in the Moosring Pass called Strange Vessel. It's just this little Dwemer vehicle that you can go in. It's very small. There's a chest in there. And this vehicle is also present in Morrowind, where it is seen to be a crashed Dwemer airship because it's not buried in the snow at that point. The thing is kind of jury-rigged together, and it was sent by a mage to sail through the sky to retrieve an amulet on Solstheim. The ship went down and killed the whole crew. You can see the ship entirely in Morrowind, including its Dwemer figurehead. And what's quite impressive to me is that even after over 200 years, the ship in Skyrim still hums with energy. It emits light and steam from its fixtures and its pipes. So those Dwemer, they built things to last, right? They didn't mess around with planned obsolescence or anything. But yeah, I think that does it for our investigation of Solstheim today. I'm sure there are other Easter eggs and connections that I missed. But this is, just a broad overview of the differences between Solstheim in Morrowind and Solstheim in Skyrim when it appeared about a decade later. So I hope that you found it interesting, especially if you've only played Skyrim and didn't know that Solstheim had appeared in an earlier game. But until next time, my friends, take care